Welcome everyone to Fuzz TV. I am Peter and today I'm going to be talking about The Penguin. Episode 8 is called A Great or Little Thing, and of course it is the finale of the season or possibly series. I mean, I guess I don't really know if they might do more of this. If they do more, I suspect it would be after the next movie, and maybe they'll have another story in mind for then. Obviously, I was very wrong about some things and quite right about others going into the finale. But what I will say is that the stuff that they did differently from what I expected was better. Like, and that's always the best case scenario, is that if it feels that they've set something up and you can see where something's going and they do something a little bit different, ideally you want that to be because, they've got a better idea that's actually even better, even richer than what you had in mind, because they had something that were kind of playing close to the chest. And what I'm meaning there specifically is that I went into this episode, I said this last episode, that we're getting into this, and that Penguin, the ultimate revenge that Sophia was going to go for was the idea that he was going to have to admit to his mother what he'd done to his brothers, because maybe she didn't know, or at the very least had forgotten or repressed it in some kind of dramatic way. It ended up being flipped. This was more about punishing him by her revealing that she always knew, and more specifically, that she had actually arranged to have young Oswald killed by the gangster friend she had that we get introduced to in the flashback. And they do this in an interesting way where it's actually older Frances in the scenes, because the idea is she's in the therapy, she's having the hypnosis, and she's reliving this memory. So there's little glimpses of young Frances in the reflections, but it's actually the actress Deirdre O'Connell who's playing out the scene in the past with the young actor playing Oz and all the other stuff. Which is a really interesting choice. It was nice to see a bit more of the kid actor, because he was so good at being a young version of the Penguin last time, so it was nice to see a bit more of that. But yeah, the ultimate admission, the thing that we didn't know going in, is that she not only figured it out, and that's why she was so cold with him for so long, and that night that she came out in the dress and said, "Hey, let's go dancing," Penguin talks about that as if that's the night she finally kind of broke through and opened up to him and was then kind of on his side from that point on. In reality, that was the night she was luring him out so that he could be killed. It was all a set-up to get him killed and take him out of the picture. But instead, because young Penguin, young Oz, makes this big speech to her about giving her the world and all the promises he makes to her about giving her a better life and the penthouse, which ties into something that even the gangster friend had already said, that if he has done this, if he's what you say, if he is this monster, then he could be useful. He can really excel in my line of work. But you have to be able to control him, and you can do that because he's devoted to you, because you're his mother. He'll always kind of answer to you in some way. So she basically decides, we don't even see that moment. We just see her contemplating it, and then it cuts to the title. It's actually a really good cut to the title. We get this long, extended, mostly flashback scene before it goes to the title screen, and there's little bits in there where she looks over and sees Sophia and the therapist like looking at her, and so it's all very stylish, it's all very well done and cinematic, but ultimately it's about revealing that she was going to have him killed and chose not to, chose to look aside, look the other way from the fact that Penguin had killed her other two sons, and just kind of live with that out of the promise of the life that could come. And I really like that reveal, because it felt like it fit so well thematically into Sophia's story, which was that so much of her story was about her family looking the other way at what her father had been doing, and Sophia wasn't doing that. And maybe Sophia was going to do it. I mean, that's the thing, like, Sophia kind of was starting to poke around, and it felt like maybe after the father confronted her, maybe she would have backed down, maybe she would have done what he wanted and been too scared to say anything or do anything. But of course, she never got that chance. She was thrown in Arkham, and the story played out as it did. But this idea that Penguin's mother kind of looked the other way when her own son had done something so violent to someone that she'd cared about, when Sophia's whole motivation this entire show has been vengeance for her brother's murder, the idea that Penguin's mother let her vengeance go, let her pain go, or not her pain, she still has her pain, but didn't follow through with that, is wonderful. It immediately felt like it made sense. Like, okay, this was an extra layer that adds on to it that just makes everything feel better, and it made the entire extended sequence in the old restaurant where they're trying to get them both to open up and talk about this stuff, all the more exciting and all the more dramatically intriguing, because how is one of them going to react when the other finally confesses up? And I think the choices they made in this scene are very satisfying. The idea that Penguin refuses to ever admit what he did and acts like it's just like complete nonsense, that never happened, Sophia's making stuff up, and even when Frances sort of says she already knows, Penguin blames her illness. He blames, like, yo, you're confused. He basically starts gaslighting her and using her illness as an easy scapegoat as to why this is a bunch of nonsense. Even though he's clearly he's clearly reacting to what's being said. You know, he's screaming when he's gagged until Sophia starts hinting by telling this story about birds like killing their own brother and becoming the stronger favorite and all that. And Penguin clearly kind of like starts to pay attention to what she's saying because it's starting to hit some nerves. But my favorite detail of this scene actually is that during the whole we're going to make Penguin admit what he did to his mother, she does a whole thing where she has them like go to chop off Frances's finger, and you know, does it very slowly and demands that he be honest and tell the truth. All he has to do is admit it. And Frances even yells out, "I already know. Jesus Christ, Oswald, just admit it. I know already. Don't let them take my finger." And I think this idea that even in that situation, he would rather his mother lose the finger than admit what he did and break the charade that he's had the entire life. And my favorite detail of even that is it's not even his decision, although I love his decision because it's just how much of a bastard he is, and kind of like paints a light on like how much he actually cares for his mother. Does he care for his mother, or does he care about the image he has of his mother? Like the supporter of like one who always believes in him. It's like this projection onto her as opposed to what's actually right for her, what's best for her. And maybe that's an obvious thing to say given he killed her other sons, but even in this context, he's still not willing to do it to protect her from torture and pain. But my favorite thing about it is Sophia's reaction to this, because Sophia goes through like a roller coaster of reactions during this scene where she's kind of enjoying it. She's punishing Penguin, she's in her element, and she's saying, hey, all you have to do is admit it, and she's got like a smirk in her face, and she's clearly enjoying breaking him. But the moment she starts to realize that it's not going to happen, and she looks over at Francis' finger like almost being cut off, and she looks back at Penguin, and the look in her face when she realizes, holy shit, you were going to let me do that. You would have let me take her finger. That moment, I think, is so good, because as much as Sophia's learned about Penguin, she didn't actually learn enough. Like, it was still more than she was even anticipating, just how much of a monster he is. And, you know, she brings it up later when in the car when she's like, oh, you were right. I never noticed you sitting there all that time. I never really saw who you were. But not in the way Penguin meant it when he said it. She's like, no, you're like a monster. You're worse than everyone else. You're something specially evil. And this episode, of course, further proves that later with other things that happen. I love this whole sequence. It was excellent. I mean, maybe you could argue that the way he breaks out the chair and it all kind of quickly wraps up is a little anticlimactic, but obviously the rest of the episode has to play out. And everything from a character perspective is so satisfying in the scene itself that I had very little to complain about. Much like the conversations that Sophia's had with other characters that I found very compelling over the last 2 or 3 episodes, this felt kind of like that, but with a lot more stakes and heightened tension because there's literally torture, and the dynamics between Penguin and his mother as it's like, hey, just admit what you did to save me. I already know anyway, so it's not really that big of a deal. And Penguin still won't do it. It's just such an interesting dynamic to me that I thought it was by far the most fascinating choice. And then everything with Frances, really, because Frances obviously gets hit. Well, she has kind of a bad reaction, but she gets hit in the head when she collapses after she has like a weird vision of her dead sons. But she ends up in hospital, and at the end of the episode, she's had a stroke, and her eyes are open, but she's in a vegetative state. And Penguin freaks out about this, of course, and he's like demanding, please, tell me you're proud of me. Tell me, like, he's looking for that adoration. He's looking for that acceptance and the pat in the back and all that. And at the very end of the episode, we find out that he has kept her alive in his new penthouse that he's got, and that's something that he spoke about always getting her, was the penthouse with no one above you and no one at the sides. And we find out that he's kept her alive. He's not let her die. He's kept her alive on, medical machines, hooked up to whatever, looking out the window. She's got tears running down her eyes, even in her current state. And it felt cruel to me. It felt cruel because it goes back to that scene from, episode 5, I think it was, where she asked to be killed. She says that she wants to die. She doesn't want to become any worse off than she already is. She'd rather go out when she's got her own terms. And here she is at the polar extreme of, like, not being there on her own terms. Like, she is just lying there with no control, no anonymity of whatsoever. And Penguin's keeping her alive just for himself, which kind of sums up what his relationship to his mother's been his entire life. It's this thing that he takes and takes and takes from and requires and projects onto, as opposed to someone who he actually wants the person themselves and respects what they actually want. So, and it's not so much that I think he's doing this out of spite at the end, but I think it points to just how he actually is and how he's viewed her this entire time. And I don't even know how to start analyzing the weird, like, he's making Eve dress up like his mother in the same dress and pretend to be his mother so she can tell him she's so proud of him and that he's taken over the city. And, like, that is all kinds of messed up psychologically. I'm just, because at first I thought she was just dressed like her, and which was already creepy, because I thought, wait, you're going to have sex with her when she's dressed like her mother and she's, like, pretending to be her? That's kind of weird. But then she starts actually talking to him like she's his mother, and whatever. Like, definitely very messed up, and I feel like there's probably a psychology course, the Freudian stuff here that is kind of delving into that. I really I'm unequipped to properly go into it, but it certainly felt like a fitting place to leave his character. It felt like, a perversion of the idea of, like, adoring your mother, right? It felt like, funnily enough, it made me think a little bit of another Batman villain. It made me think of Mr. Freeze, and almost how, like, the frozen wife Nora becomes this, like, obsessive thing for him, and it's this symbol of something. But does she want to be frozen until she can be saved? Does she want any of this, or is it just what he is projecting onto her? It kind of made me think of that in a lot of ways with the way Penguin is with his mother. And obviously, one of the things I said was that if we are going to get any kind of hint or cameo of some kind of Batman thing, it would be in the finale. I speculated maybe like a silhouette, of just, not the actor, but just a silhouette. They did something very similar to that, actually, and you could sort of see it coming in those last few seconds, where the last line is that no one in Gotham can, stop you, or whatever the line was. And the camera, like, pans out to the city, and it clicked where I went, oh, the bat signal's about to turn on. And sure enough, that's how it ends. Which is perfect. Like, that's not a complaint. I think that's the perfect way to end this and sort of hand it back over for the next movie. So, no complaints for that little nice... I feel like a nice ending to do it that way. So, I mean, that was the stuff with the mother that I kind of wanted to get to first. There's a lot of stuff with Penguin, obviously, this episode, though. You've got his stuff where he kind of sets up his new future, both by, one, cuddling up to the councilman that he kind of threatened previously, and sort of sells him this story of everything that's went down between the Maronis and the Falcones, and basically puts the blame of almost everything he's done on one or either of those camps. Oh, it was the Falcones who burned Maroni's family alive. Oh, and Maroni's the one that had the drug lab underneath where the explosion happened. And all of this, it sells this story, and the idea is that he can be more accepted in the legitimate side of the world. Not because he's going legitimate for it by any stretch of the imagination, but just more that he can cuddle up with all the corrupt people in the in the system. I thought this was interesting, especially when the councilman says, hey, you're going to have to clean up and look like you belong, which is almost another little hint of, hey, get your traditional Penguin tux and top hat, which we kind of see. You don't see him wearing the hat at the end, but he's carrying a top hat, so they're not quite giving it to us just yet. So we might see him properly in that get-up when we get to the next movie. So that's interesting. The other big thing, of course, is there's a whole plot here where Sophia puts a hit out on him and basically says to all the other gangs, whoever brings me Oz can have all of the infrastructure of the Falcone crime family. I don't want it. I'm leaving. Whoever brings me Oz gets everything. And it turns out that it's actually Vic's idea to turn the second in command for the triads. And it leads, once the whole thing goes down, which ultimately, results in Penguin getting Sophia instead of Sophia getting Penguin, we see that all of the second in commands of all the different gangs all kill their leaders. And it's the idea that these people are all sick of being overlooked. They all feel like Penguin used to, being under Falcone, where they think they've got potential, they want to be in charge, and he's basically staged this sort of line, citywide uprising between all the second in commands who are all presumably somewhat loyal to him going forward. So he's kind of done it. He's kind of become the kingpin of Gotham and laid way for more to come. I don't have too much to say on that. It made a reasonable amount of sense. I like that it fed back into the idea of playing on how he used to feel, of like inspiring the flipping of all these various like second in commands, because they all feel like they've been overlooked. They all feel like they deserve more, that their boss has been putting them down and not giving them anything off their plate, as Penguin puts it a little bit when he's talking to Sophia. So, and they also did a swerve here where you think Sophia's going to die, and honestly it felt like something that made sense. Obviously she gets her big dramatic burning down the mansion sequence, which was very well filmed. I enjoyed all that. But when she's taken out here to like the pier or wherever it is to be killed, and she makes a little speech about, I never quite saw who you were, but your mother always did. She always knew you were a monster. And you're going to be in hell just like I am, blah, 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 blah. Like, all that stuff was solid. I think what I really liked about this scene, though, was how it was shot. Obviously, there's the swerve at the end where he's actually just left her for the authorities, which is kind of amazing in how cruel it is, because we know that she would probably rather die than go back to Arkham, and that's where she ends up, which is super, like, malicious almost, especially if he did that intentionally, and it's not just a byproduct of what the plan is. But yeah, basically they set this up earlier because he's feeding the idea that the Falcones and Maronis did all this. She's basically the big arrest for the police to make it seem like, oh, we've cleaned up the crime war in Gotham. We've done all that, right? Isn't that great? Isn't that fun? So, but it's really dramatic the way it's shot. I love this detail where the camera is sort of on a profile shot of Sophia close up. So it's just kind of like close up but on the side. And when the camera sort of like pans or maybe tracks from behind her head to the front of her head as she's sort of waiting for the bullet from Oz, it does this thing where they had like sort of lights that are in the distance out of focus, kind of almost in a row, right up just around her eye level. And it almost looked like the path of where the bullet was going to go. It was a really cool little visual detail to make you anticipate the, almost like if you were doing like a Matrix bullet time and you'd get like the ripple of the air as the bullet goes through it. That's what this sort of like out of focus sort of row of lights looked like coming out the front of her head. I thought it was a really, really inspired little visual touch. And then of course it all builds up, and then eventually you get the police coming in, which also when she was burned down the mansion, there was a really interesting cover of, oh, Where Have You Been Last Night? Is that what it's called? I don't know who the original artist is off the top of my head. I know it is the song from Nirvana's Unplugged in New York, but it's not their song originally. Someone else did it. They did a cover, but that's where I know it from. But yeah, which I don't think's an accident though that it's something that's associated with Nirvana, because the song that was with the Batman when it came out over the trailers, it's even in the movie actually, is Something in the Way, which is a Nirvana song. So I don't think that's an accident. That feels like a thematic connection there that they've chosen. But interesting with Sophia's ending though. One, her therapist who was helping her cut off fingers has got his job back. I guess he just went back and they don't know he's been doing anything illegal, so they're like, yeah, sure, you can have your job back. We're short-staffed. But she's in Arkham. She's just distraught. She's staring out the window almost like a zombie. Clearly just in hell that she's back in here. And the therapist comes in and says, "Oh, I've got your mail here. It's mostly the same stuff, whatever. But there's an interesting one from someone named Selena Kyle." And obviously my ears perked up a little bit, and I went, "Wait a minute, what?" And he's obviously read the letter already. Maybe that's just a standard thing they do for these patients. But he's like, "Yeah, she claims she's your half sister." And Sophia takes the letter, reads it, and her face does start to change, like, almost, dare I say, a smile, or at the very least some level of comfort or something, however you want to put it. And this was a very interesting detail to me for a couple of reasons. One, it was interesting because if there's a chance that Sophia might show up in the next Batman movie, this is the reason why. Potentially, like, Selena, if she's back in the movie, might come and see her. Or might, like, get her out of Arkham or something. Like, I don't know, like, where it would go, but they're intentionally bringing this link up. And I didn't even really think about the fact that Selena and Sophia were half sisters. But what I liked about it, though, the other thing that did stick out to me is that the idea that Sophia is not displeased to read this, I think was interesting to me, because Selena is probably the only person, not just because she's literally her half sister, but she also went through the same thing that Sophia went through. Selena's mother was killed by Carmine Falcone, and that's what she was, that's what she wanted revenge on him for in the movie. And Sophia's mother was killed by Carmine Falcone. It feels like there's a genuine, like, bit of bonding and something they can relate to each other in that almost no one else can relate to, at least not that specifically. It's such a specific thing. The same man, like, is their father, but also killed both their mothers. And in some level, like, Selena as Catwoman is out there doing her own thing and taking things back from the mob, and that was her thing in the movie. But that's just in general in the comics. She's out there kind of like, not being a part of the system, not being a part of the crime families, but just being out there for herself. And ultimately in the comics, Selena typically ends up being kind of an anti-hero and looking out for young girls and things like that. It makes a fair amount of sense to me that Sophia would see some appeal in her, at least this version of Sophia that we've got in the show, given everything that she obviously went through, being accused of being the hangman, what her father did to her mother, this feeling that she was overlooked by all the men and all that. It almost feels like in some levels Catwoman is the more successful version of her. Like, Sophia, by the end of the show, didn't really know what she wanted, but she realized she didn't really want to just be what her father was. Like, that's kind of why she wanted to leave, at least in part, at the end of the show. And she doesn't really know what she is wanting to be next. And I feel like Catwoman's a character who's got a very similar set of details, a similar set of background elements, who ultimately has found on some level what she wants to be and is maybe being successful at it, and maybe is a little empowering by being it. And this is an interesting avenue to go down, wherever it may be, whether it's in the next Batman movie in a little way, whether this is a seed for a potential season 2, or even, like, I don't know if they'd even want to do a Penguin season 2. Maybe they'd want to do another Gotham show, but Sophia would be like a sort of bridge character where Sophia is like the second lead in another Gotham show about someone else in the city, but we continue Sophia's story there. Maybe the same showrunners and whatnot would sort of like see, like, she would be this like through line that kind of links all the various like Batman movie show tie-ins together or something. I don't know, but this did feel like it was possibly setting something up. But at the same time, if it isn't setting something up, I think just seeing her, the look in her face as she realizes that someone else has went through what she did and can understand her on some level, maybe is a little bit healthier, but not that much healthier. She's still a Catwoman. She's still dressing up in an outfit and, jumping around and like getting into fights and whatnot. Very interesting for that to be the little one of the little teases to the movies here at the end. Obviously the bat signal's the obvious one, but this was a more nuanced one, because the bat signal's obviously fun and it makes sense. It's like, oh, you've taken over Gotham, nothing can stop you now. Oh lol, Batman's back in town, so remember what he did to you last time, Oz? Yeah, good luck with that. It's going to be so interesting in that second movie now when Batman encounters Penguin and we have all this insight to who Penguin is. Like, he's going to be so well developed to at least the audience who have watched the show. Like, he's going to be so more developed than every other character in the movie because he's had all this time and all this backstory. it'll be interesting to see how it plays off, and if he'll still feel like the same character, even though I've gotten so used to him dropping F-bombs left and right, it's going to be kind of weird when he doesn't. Maybe they'll give him one. They can get away with one in a PG-13. Maybe they'll let him have one F-bomb, and because I mean, hell, if Guardians of the Galaxy 3 can have the one F-bomb, I feel like your gritty noir Batman movie can have the one F-bomb. Why not? Maybe the Batman did have an F-bomb. I don't remember if it did. It didn't stick out in my memory if it was like a big moment. Sophia's ending, I thought, was very interesting, and certainly got my brain... Like, it wasn't necessarily any of the endings I predicted in my head for Sophia, but it was very much kind of like an open door for a lot of interesting potential, and all of it sounds good to me. All of it sounds like stuff I'd like to explore. She was such a compelling character that I'd be down for more Sophia, and whether it's a small part in the next movie, or we get to flesh more of her story out in a future show. Because I wonder if Batman takes down Penguin, not kills him obviously, because when he's Batman he doesn't kill, but if Penguin like ends up in Arkham or something in the next movie, and then Sophia somehow ends back out in Gotham, like does she have a different kind of goal? Does she have more of a purpose? I don't know. But I'm intrigued, and obviously I wonder if they've locked in some of these actors for potential things, because they know maybe what they're going to possibly end up doing, but very intriguing. I will say, like, if the quality of your tie-in TV shows to your main Batman movies can all have this level of quality, then I kind of welcome them. I think when they announced this show, I rolled my eyes a little bit, because even when they announced this show a couple of years ago, like all the Marvel TV shows were kind of a big... it feels a bit mean to say dud, right? And when I say Marvel shows, I'm specifically talking about the Disney Plus shows that are tying into the movies. Although, to be honest, even the Netflix shows were kind of already a bit of a problem. Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., because it kind of went on to become its own thing, and was just a good show with fun characters once it got going, like, it kind of was separate from this. But the Disney Plus shows had a big problem where they had a negative impact on the movies, because there's so many Marvel movies adding in 3 or 4 seasons of TV, and not even good seasons of TV for the most part. Like, those TV shows were very, very badly paced. They weren't structured like TV shows. They all felt like movies that had been just split up into chunks and felt stretched out because of it, so they weren't really satisfying as a TV show, which is where I think this show has really excelled. This was a proper TV show. Each episode, most of which were about an hour long, were full meals. There was good speculation and talk of what the character motivations and where the characters might go in between every episode. They were constantly fascinating. And I think one of the things that really stuck out about those early Disney Plus Marvel shows is that people tried to do that with that first one, with WandaVision. People tried to talk about where it was going and what everything meant, and that there was something deeper beneath the surface, only to get to the end and realize that there wasn't anything deeper beneath the surface. And even the stuff that felt like they were teasing bigger things ended up just being dumb jokes, and it just had a kind of a dumb fight at the end, and that was kind of it. All the interesting stuff that had potential was kind of withered away. Obviously, this has the benefit of basically being on its own with this one movie that isn't like tied to a bunch of other things. Even with all this other DC stuff that's going to be starting soon from James Gunn, this Batman movie universe is separate from that. But this was an excellent show, and it felt like it really fleshed out some of the characters. It had its own story to tell about Penguin, and obviously the one big scene that I've not really talked about yet further just solidifies how much of an evil bastard he is. And that is, of course, Vic. Vic tries to unite the gangs to come and get him. They kind of, they basically all want to leave. They resist. Vic calls them cowards, which gets him almost shot, and it's actually the second in command of the Triads that comes up and punches him, which effectively saves his life, even though he punches him. But that's kind of like the opening the door to the idea of like Vic having the idea later to turn all the second in commands on their leaders, or at the very least he has the idea for the one anyway, for the Triads. I mean, it was probably Penguin who had the idea to turn everyone else, but that's there. And he also got a great moment where he makes a speech to Penguin when Penguin's in the hospital, because during the whole thing with his mother actually stabbed him with a broken bottle, which I didn't even mention before, but that was the thing that happened. And while he's patching himself up, Vic gives him a speech to be the effing Penguin. Go out there and, be you. Go do this thing. Like, you did all this. You got the power back on. You've got power. People respect and care about you. You give people jobs in my neighborhood, blah, blah, blah. He does a whole thing. And it's kind of a sweet scene because Penguin even looks up and says, oh, did you rehearse that? And he's like, shut up. Yeah, it was good. It was good. It really felt like proper bonding. And pretty much for a lot of the show, I feel like we've all been expecting that Penguin, just to prove how much of a bastard he is probably going to turn on Vic. And that does happen. But it happens it's the way it happens that's important. Because the way it happens feels like especially evil. Because it's not in the heat of the moment where he has to make a choice between doing the right thing to save Vic and saving his money or something like that, which is maybe what I would have thought of before. And he would just not choose Vic and leave Vic to die, and it would be kind of a more normal moment for dramatic TV standards anyway. This was like after he's won, they're sitting, Penguin's like, kind of pouring his heart out about his mother's current state. This is after they know she's had the stroke, and they're kind of celebrating as well though, because everything's went off without a hitch, and like they've won and all the rest of it. And Vic thanks Penguin for taking a chance on him and says, you're like family to me, which almost felt like the death knell. That was like, as soon as he said that, I'm like, oh no. He's just going to kill you now because he doesn't want to have any more family to care about because his mother's been such a goddamn pain. And Penguin's first ever act of evil was killing his own family to get what he wants. So in this moment, Penguin puts his arm around him and it's kind of a sweet moment, but then very, very quickly it turns into him strangling Vic. And I think what really stuck out about this is that it's not just that he shoots Vic in the head and it's over. He does it slowly. He does it by hand. And the entire time, Vic is trying to say the word please. He's begging for his life as Penguin kills him. And it's like, it's a very quiet scene. It's like the scene at the end of an episode of The Wire where he leaves Vic's body just lying there next to the water. And he takes his ID, he looks at it, and he throws it in the water, so he's harder to identify. But it's a super cold sequence. And it's just this further examination of Penguin. I actually was really worried for Eve when he was dancing with her at the end, because I thought maybe he would figure out that Eve told Sophia where he was, and that's how she found him before. And that never happens in the scene, but it did kind of feel like, oh, maybe he'll figure something out. But it's almost like Eve, in a weird way, her keeping up that like divide of like, no, yes, I'll say I love you and I'll do all these things and I'll be there for you more than the other customers. But it's almost like Eve is trying to, like, whether or not she consciously knows why she's doing it or like even understands the extent of the danger of Penguin, that divide of like, no, I'm providing a service and you're a customer and I'll say what you want to hear, but it's almost like that divide that she's trying to maintain is maybe going to help save her life, at least for a while. That said, though, it feels like at this point Penguin could just kill anyone in his life. Either they're not important enough to him that he'll care, or they're too important to him and he'll see it as a weakness of having them around now. And that's super sinister. It's super dark. I'm sure I've glossed over a bit here or there. There's a lot of things I liked in this, though, from a visual perspective. I loved Oz going to the government building and being inside the chambers and using the gavel, and just all these little things of him being somewhere where he clearly doesn't belong and then try to talk his way into belonging there, which has kind of been his whole thing the entire time, is him trying to belong in the upper ranks of the mob, and now he's trying to belong at the top of the mob, someone who's got a good relationship with people on the inside of the government to keep all the wheels turning. I think it's a really strong character piece, this show, and I think it's not only has Penguin been super compelling, but so is Sophia, and even Vic's been a solid supporting character for Penguin's story, although he always had a purpose for Penguin's story, and that's kind of the thing. Sophia, even though obviously her story bounces off Penguin a lot, she felt like she had her own story, like, on her own. Like, she felt like she had her own story that wasn't just serving Penguin's plot. And I think that's what made her such a compelling, like, character for him to bounce off of. It felt like the show was equally both of theirs a lot of the time. And it's why it's very easy to imagine her being left off here at the end of this to be in either a season 2 of this, a different spin-off show, or the movies themselves, whatever it may be. It all feels valid because they've built her up so well. But this also kind of works as an ending, potentially, if they do never bring her back. Although I would rather she did come back than didn't. But we'll see. Yeah, as an addition to this Batman universe, it was an exceptional home run, pretty much. Like you can nitpick some things if you want, and it's super interesting because obviously I love Nolan's Batman trilogy, right? The Dark Knight trilogy is exceptional, and I think The Dark Knight is the best Batman movie still, and I love that trilogy. But there is something super interesting about the way this is fleshed out Gotham City's plethora of characters, to the point where this version of Gotham feels like it has more character and is more fleshed out than maybe they ever were in that movie or in those movies. And I think that could be the asset that this version of Batman has on the big screen, is that not only does it feel a bit more comic booky on the screen when you're watching it, but even just the fact that we've had this extra time to flesh out the fact that the Penguin is a crime boss and he has built up his way, he's worked his way up through the city, and he's taken control, and he's super established. Like, there's a lot more here than any villain in any of those Nolan movies could have ever had. And it's kind of funny because there's no way Penguin's going to be the main villain of the Batman 2. It's going to be someone flashier. It's going to be someone like a bigger deal. But Penguin's being treated as this mainstay who can be there to anchor everything around. Especially when you're going for the more down to earth, like, crime version of Gotham as opposed to the more fantastical characters, which I would like to see them try. I guess that's the one disappointment with the Batman's universe, is that I would have liked that to be an opportunity to, like, do something like a Clayface or a Killer Croc or something. Maybe they'll surprise me. Maybe they'll do something ballsy for the second or even, dare I say, third movies. But regardless, I'm curious to see what we do in the movie now, and I'm very curious to see if we get a second season or another show that's kind of in the similar vein between 2 and 3, if, like, maybe Gotham's changed significantly again because of the events of the second movie. You know, is there more bigger villains running around? Is there more of a rogues gallery all operating? That'd be fascinating to see. So, yeah. As far as, like, good TV character writing goes, this was very satisfying. As far as being a Batman and comic book fan goes, this was also very satisfying. So I have very little to complain about, ultimately, barring some little nitpicks here or there. You know, one episode was a bit slower and felt like a bridging episode, but other than that, can't really complain. Performance from Farrell and Milioti were both off the charts. They were exceptional. That is my thoughts on the Penguin finale. Let me know what you thought of the episode in the comments below. Like, subscribe, all that stuff, ding the bell. You can, of course, support all the content over at patreon.com/MailFuzzTV, which will also get you bonuses for all the MailFuzz Movies podcasts. Go check out that YouTube channel if you haven't. That's where the horror movie podcast, the sci-fi movie podcast, and all that stuff is. And, of course, you can also support via YouTube membership, but I recommend Patreon because you'll get all the stuff for the other channel as well. But that is me. Thank you very much for joining. I do appreciate it. Keep watching TV. And have you got... I forgot my outro lines. I'm just stalling to remember what I say. Have you got any vanilla?